Imagine you walk into a dealership and right there on the floor sits a brand new electric car. Sleek design, massive touchscreen, ventilated seats, a 400-mile range, and a built-in drone that literally flies out of the trunk. The price tag? Under $30,000. You blink. You look around. You check if there's a camera crew somewhere because surely this is a joke. But it's not a joke. It's not a clearance sale. It's not a government subsidy trick. It's just a Chinese electric vehicle. And that feeling you just got, that mix of excitement and suspicion and mild panic, that is exactly what millions of Americans are about to experience. And most of them have no idea what's coming. If you've ever looked at a Chinese EV spec sheet and thought this can't be real, stick around because today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most calculated and historically rooted business strategies in the entire automotive world. And trust me, by the end of this video, you will never look at a car price tag the same way again. Hey, this is Mark, and you're welcome to AUTOSAYS. Hit that like button right now and subscribe if you want the kind of automotive content the mainstream media is too nervous to touch, because today we're going deep. Let's go back, way back, not to a factory floor in Shenzhen or a Tesla showroom in California, but to post-war Japan in the late 1940s. The country had been devastated, factories were rubble, the economy was in pieces, and yet within a generation, Japan would produce some of the most reliable, affordable, and mechanically brilliant cars the world had ever seen. Toyota, Honda, Nissan, these weren't overnight miracles. They were the product of a very specific strategy: build more than the customer expects, charge less than the competition dares, and over time, own the market. Sound familiar? It should, because China just opened the same playbook. But here's the terrifying part for every Western automaker sitting in a boardroom right now. China didn't just copy the Japanese strategy, they turbocharged it with 2 decades of state-backed investment, a domestic market of 1.4 billion people to test on, and a level of vertical integration that would make even Elon Musk slightly uncomfortable. We are not watching the beginning of this story. We are somewhere deep in the middle of it, and most American consumers haven't even realized the first chapter happened. So let's talk about what over-engineering actually means in this context, because this word gets thrown around a lot and people assume it means complicated or unnecessarily fancy. That is not what we mean here. When Chinese automakers, companies like BYD, NIO, Li Auto, and XPeng put features into a $40,000 car that American brands reserve for $90,000 cars, that is not an accident. That is not generosity. That is a weapon. Think about it from a pure financial angle. If you are trying to enter a market that is already dominated by legacy brands with 100 years of consumer trust, what do? You can't just match them. Matching them makes you invisible. You have to make the customer feel like they're getting away with something. You have to make them feel like they found a secret. And that psychological trigger, that sense of discovery, that feeling of outsmarting the system is one of the most powerful purchase motivators in consumer psychology. Chinese EV brands studied this. They understood that the American consumer in particular is obsessed with the idea of value, not just price. Americans don't want cheap. Americans want to feel smart. So the strategy became make a product so loaded, so polished, so unexpectedly premium that walking away feels like leaving money on the table. Now, here's where the history gets really interesting and honestly a little unsettling. In the 1970s, American automakers laughed at Japanese imports, genuinely laughed. Ford executives reportedly joked that you could poke a finger through the sheet metal of a Toyota Corolla. They called the cars tin cans. They called the buyers cheap. And for a brief moment, they were partially right. Early Japanese exports were not perfect. But while Detroit was laughing, Toyota was learning. Every complaint, every warranty issue, every piece of customer feedback was fed back into an obsessive improvement cycle called Kaizen, continuous improvement. By the time American manufacturers stopped laughing and started panicking, it was too late. Honda and Toyota had already built a loyalty base that would take decades to crack. Fast forward 50 years, Chinese automakers are not coming in with rusty hinges and peeling interiors. They are arriving with LiDAR sensors, in-car gaming systems, rotating front seats, solar panel roofs, and battery technology that charges faster than you can eat a fast food meal. They skipped the awkward phase entirely. They watched the Japanese playbook because yes, Hyundai and Kia ran a very similar strategy in the 90s and 2000s, and then they said, okay, but what if we did all of that faster with more features and with the full financial backing of the world's second largest economy? That question is now a product, and that product is sitting on a ship headed towards ports that politicians are desperately trying to close. Let's pause here because you might be wondering if these cars are so incredible, why aren't they already on American roads? Great question, and the answer reveals something important about the financial and political machinery that protects legacy industries. Right now, Chinese EVs face tariffs as high as 100% in the United States. That means a car that sells for $25,000 in China would theoretically land on American soil priced at $50,000, before dealer markup, before transport costs, before anything else. The Biden administration doubled these tariffs in 2024. The Trump administration has made noise about going even further. On the surface, this looks like protection of American workers, and in the short term, maybe it is. But history has a warning for us here. When American steel companies lobbied for protection from cheaper foreign steel in the 80s, they got it, and for a while it worked. But what actually happened, American manufacturers who needed steel, automakers, construction companies, appliance makers, started losing ground to foreign competitors who had access to cheaper inputs. The tariff wall bought time, but it didn't create innovation, and time, as we are about to see, is running faster than anyone in Detroit wants to admit. Here is the number that should make every American car executive lose sleep at night. In 2020, China sold about 1.3 million electric vehicles. By 2023, that number had exploded to over 8 million in a single country in 3 years. That kind of scale does something extraordinary to a manufacturer's cost structure. When you are building millions of battery packs per year, the cost per unit drops dramatically. When you control your own battery supply chain, and BYD does, they make their own batteries, their own chips, and increasingly their own steel, your margins look nothing like what Ford or GM are dealing with. Ford reportedly loses over $40,000 on every electric vehicle it sells right now. Read that again. Every single F-150 Lightning that rolls off the line is costing Ford more than $40,000 in losses per unit. Meanwhile, BYD reported record profits in 2023. Same industry, completely different financial reality. And this gap is not closing, it is widening. Because while Ford is still trying to figure out how to make EVs profitable, BYD is already onto the next phase, exporting that profitability advantage to every market on Earth that will let them in. Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Australia. They are building factories in Hungary, in Brazil, in Thailand. The global footprint is being laid right now while American consumers are largely unaware because the cars aren't here yet. But here is the cliffhanger that should keep you up at night. They don't have to be here yet, because the moment the political calculus shifts, and in global trade it always shifts, the moment a future administration decides that affordable transportation is a bigger voter priority than protecting legacy automakers, or the moment a Chinese brand finds a smart enough workaround like building a factory in Mexico to sidestep tariffs, the floodgates don't open gradually, they open all at once. And at that point, American consumers will have a choice. Pay $45,000 for a Chevy Equinox EV, or pay $28,000 for a Chinese competitor with more features, longer range, and a warranty that rivals anything on the market. What do you think most people will choose? This is not a hypothetical. This is already playing out in Australia, where BYD has become the best-selling EV brand. It's happening in Thailand, where Chinese brands now hold over 80% of the EV market. It's happening in Brazil. It's happening in the UK. The American market is not immune. It is simply delayed. Now let's zoom in on the over-engineering strategy itself, because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating from an engineering and financial perspective. Chinese automakers made a deliberate decision early in their EV development cycle to stop thinking about cost-cutting the way Western manufacturers do. Traditional automotive cost-cutting means, do customers notice this feature? No? Remove it. Will customers pay extra for this upgrade? No, don't include it standard. It is a philosophy built entirely around the minimum viable product. Chinese EV strategy flipped this completely. Their internal philosophy became, what would make someone who has never considered our brand suddenly feel like they cannot afford to not buy from us? That shift in framing changes everything. Instead of asking what can we remove, they asked what can we add that will feel shocking. Surround sound audio systems that rival home theater setups, dashboards that function more like living room entertainment centers, suspension systems that actively scan the road and adjust in real time, facial recognition that remembers your seat position, your preferred cabin temperature, your favorite playlists. These are not experimental luxury features in a concept car. These are standard equipment in mass-market vehicles that cost less than a loaded Honda Accord. And the reason they can do this without bleeding money, the reason the strategy is financially sustainable for them and financially devastating for competitors, comes down to one word that every investor and car enthusiast needs to tattoo somewhere visible: verticality, vertical integration. BYD does not buy batteries from Panasonic. BYD does not buy semiconductors from Qualcomm. BYD does not outsource its software development to a third party. BYD makes its own batteries through a subsidiary called FinDreams. It designs its own chips, it writes its own software, it manufactures its own motors. When you eliminate the profit margin of every supplier in your chain and bring those margins in-house, the money you save doesn't just disappear, it gets redirected into the product, into features, into the very over-engineering that makes a customer's jaw drop when they sit in a $40,000 car and feel like they're in something that should cost $90,000. This is not magic. This is decades of deliberate industrial policy, executed with a patience and precision that Western democracies with 4-year election cycles genuinely struggle to replicate. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave the American car buyer, the American automaker, the American worker? The answer is uncomfortable, and I want to be honest with you because that's what this channel is for. The American auto industry is not doomed, but it is at an inflection point unlike any it has faced since the Japanese invasion of the 70s. The companies that survive, and some absolutely will be the ones that stop treating the Chinese EV threat as a political problem to be solved with tariffs and start treating it as an engineering and financial challenge to be solved with innovation. That means investing in domestic battery supply chains with the same urgency China applied 10 years ago. It means rethinking the cost structure of building electric vehicles from the ground up. It means accepting that the customer of 2030 will have options that the customer of 2024 can barely imagine. And those options will include very good, very affordable, very feature-rich vehicles from manufacturers that many Americans have still never heard of. The window to adapt is open, but windows don't stay open forever. History has shown us this with brutal consistency. Ask Kodak, ask Blockbuster, ask every American television manufacturer that no longer exists. The Chinese EV isn't coming. It's already built, it's already tested, it's already beloved by tens of millions of customers on 3 continents. The only question that remains is when it arrives on your street and whether the cars you grew up loving will still be around to compete with it.